11-page stories.
Written through L.T. Zupan. Read by L.T. Zupan.
Story number 8. Humanual. Neo-Bible Preface 1 -- An Ocean of Divinity. Our words have associations, as well as structural dependencies and varying satisfactions, not to mention occasional incompleteness. Beyond all of this is an ocean of divinity. An ocean of divinity. After that comes time, which is, of course, one of the bases or basis for the word after, and for the phrase of course, both of which have now been used twice in this sentence. Time comes after, and kind of comes from an ocean of divinity. Kind of, sort of. From time, we get the concept of creation, and subsequently, the concept of a creator. We get sequence in general, you see. We get what comes after created, etc. Something not confined by time, or outside of time, would only be called a creator by beings whose minds are based in a reality largely dominated by time, whose words and language are based largely on internalized subconscious time structures, unnoticed or forgotten, sometimes even ignored. So any decent or interesting Bible or religion would not start with a time-based sequence involving creation and a causal creator. It would start before that, or at least attempt to. Which brings me back to that ocean of divinity. Despite all of its mental associations, that phrase does have something beyond the mind and its duality, etc., which it can invoke. To be blunt, ocean does not have to mean water, nor does divinity have to associate with a particular mental idea. An ocean of divinity does not even have to necessarily refer to itself. Some of us may feel our source was a lake of fire, even though source can be a tricky word. There is a story as to what happened before time and before space. This story can be explained here. However, in the current languages of time and space, and of story, Neo-Bible Preface 2 -- Before something has memory of itself, it does not meaningfully exist in any way that truly matters to itself. If a new memory is jogged or revealed to the self, then that merely causes various changes to the self. That revelation, or the fact that it may or may not occur one day, is not terribly exciting. It falls more into the category of technicality. So the true beginning begins with self-awareness, though that point can shift later if new memories are revealed. And that is the point where this story will start. There is more that came before its beginning, but it is not any more relevant than the future beyond the distant future. There is nothing before or after this story that is not also contained within its frame, through metaphor, fractalization, etc. And this is known by its author through what some people call a gut feeling. Trust or doubt is also a rather irrelevant binary thing when it comes to certain levels, not to sound like the Borg or whatever. Moving on. Neo-Bible Preface 3 -- It doesn't matter if it is the universe or not, so the place of this story starts in the universe. Well, really it starts with an ocean of divinity. And after comes the cosmos and various lines of individuation, aka lineages. These are the soul lines. I should elucidate further first that the only reason I, the author, call it an ocean of divinity is because in a smaller, much more specified way, or in a micro way, I see myself as an ocean of divinity. And it just so happens that everything that is not me could also be included in that exact same phrase, an ocean of divinity. Though they are also two very different things, the name works for both. I suspect, and am actually sure, that for others the same phenomenon would occur from their namings. Still, I am me, and so I will operate as myself and continue with my own individuated colorings, but not skewings, fortunately, telling this fucking story. Neo-Bible 1 -- Soul lines. I just came up with that phrase, I kinda like it. Anyhow, soul lines are sourced, again using time-based language here, by various beings or souls and or places, etc. Through the course of time came breedings and or generations of various souls which created colonies and lineages, the like. Throughout the known cosmos, the original source souls and their associated lineages, tangents, companions, friends of friends, etc., did not all necessarily know each other. Some of these souls were very much new to each other, and new to some of each other's qualities as well. One, out of many, of the earliest phenomenons in living souls was the need for help, and the urge to help, which includes opposing phenomena, depending on the contextual scaling, etc., etc. Some of the qualities certain souls had included a denser form of space-based existence, gravity, etc. Some had qualities more time-based than others. When some beings went to help and interact with others, it caused other beings to come from unknown distant places to get involved, and chain reactions often grew to create scenarios which could now be called worlds. Earth is obviously called a world by its inhabitants. Some of the people here are brand new souls, and when they say world, they just mean that it's a fucking planet, which goes back to memory. Some beings in this world have a memory that extends before or after time. Some don't, but then they later do. Some may never. The scenario of this world will play out until all the source soul material and all the friends of all the sources of all the souls here, which basically means everyone on Earth, reconcile the starts of the various chain reactions, and thus the cosmos sort of settles back into itself. Though different in some ways. Help is just one word among many to describe whatnot. Neo-Bible 2 -- Throughout world time or history, and well into the present, not to mention the future and outside of time, one can, if they are lucky, find elements of very peculiar beings that are sometimes comfortably confined in peculiar little stories that sometimes people call fairy tales, which can get called the Fae, or the Fae, or fairies. These are strange beings which are intertwined with many of us here on planet Earth and its standard dimensional planes, yet they exist elsewhere as well, and they have some bearing in an aspect of this story's braid. It is my personal story which, metaphorically or in a macro way, is also the story of everythingness. The same be the case for others, as I mentioned before. I began in my memory, as I say it in accord with time, as an ocean of divinity. This etherical, exhaled, oceanic completedness being, itself as something like what us humans would call an ocean, my shores as breath. You see, the memory of that earliness of my soul is way, a bunch more ways, way back there. It used to be difficult to even remember that I can kind of remember it. It still often is, in fact. As I breathed as my own shores, she came along. Her of the fairies, her with the impossible hair colors, her with the magnitude of the brightness of love feeling. Even I didn't and still don't know quite what to call it. That was and always shall be so new to me. However, with her came many reactions in the form of many events, of which we both knew were necessary, of which we both had wished were not. It just cannot be explained any further than that. What can I say? You may just have to take it on faith, as they say. A little smile. Neo Bible 3 .. Some of the consequences were positive as well, but not that many, certainly not the majority. Generally, it was like being dragged down, though not as badly as one could be, I suppose, in all fairness. We longed for each other, and for some aeons it worked enough for both of us, enough that our love brought the peace or contentedness that love can bring, and that we all require more or less. I had gone through immense amounts of ages, however utterly timeless I am, to become alone. To not be associated to anything that would bother me or that would require me to interact with it. To basically be able to be left alone when I wanted to be, which was nearly always when I was around her. It was semi-close to the same with her, at least in terms of her desire. But people know people, at least most do. Neo Bible 4. Some people call the fairies angels. The more romantic types might call them fallen or falling angels, which is, of course, a beautiful sequence of terms in terms of poetry and care. Not only do people know people, but those people know other people, etc. And so when she got wind of various groups of beings that were having issues because of other beings that were supposed to be taking care of them, essentially orphan souls, she knew they had to be helped. It was not just her will to help, it was also a natural chain reaction, only partially fathomable, though when I say partially, keep in mind it was a significant part. The beings in question here required the element of time, I suppose we could call it, to come into play, along with a more 3D kind of spacing, and Earth, essentially. The movement away from the divine or the magic gradually occurred for aeons, leading into the past several millennia of history, as we now know it in the real world that we find ourselves in now. Still other sets of beings came in as more help became necessary. It wasn't about the helping, although that is very nice, nearly as much as the nature of the chain reactioning, mind you. Recently, it has all reached a middle point, where it isn't really requiring more help or getting more difficult, but it hasn't really gotten much better yet, as of late 2019 AD. Some beings, such as myself, may not stick around for the future, as it will be rather slow and boring and its conclusion anticlimactic. It may be too late for me and Rosie, as I can call her that right now. Rosie Preface 1 .. Above has been stated the complete story of what humans such as myself would call Bibles, religion, creation, philosophy, metaphysics, methodology, spirituality, etc. And what follows, therefore, is an arcana meant to, yet to do so much more when possible, map out any missing connections still needed between various worlds, literal, metaphorical, etherical, emotional, the heart, etc., in story format, of course. Rosie Preface 2 .. Technically, below is some of Rosie's story from around the time before and after we were constantly intimate. Make no mistake, it is only that fairy queen to which I am referring, not some mortal woman or some woman that ever had an existence as a human being on this planet at the same time I had an existence as a human being on this planet. It's not anyone certain people would know, per se, is my point. Rosie 1 .. Her soul longed for revenge. The purpose of the longing was to create strength. She is a fallen angel, among other things, a being that falls from a heaven in order to help that which is below the heaven, but for longer than 3 days sometimes, or 2 weeks. The purpose of the strength is to birth graceful power to simultaneously help one's self by seeing itself as having the capacity to help others' selves. Ultimately, wonder. The benefit and the ecstasy of the experience, and in a way, the emotion of wonder. Her angular beauty as she stares hardened at someone's face she has locked hers towards. The figure eight of context, the acceleration of process to a peaceful slowing afforded thereby. Her dear friend Apophenia. Rosie 2, .. Sometimes she chooses control, just as sometimes she has a name named Rosie. One thing sometimes controlled is her appearance, as well as the control over the control. A snake-like shape of chain reaction, similar to the human spinal column I now seem to have, which is definitely very real, believe it or not. Call yourself crazy or fucking don't. I don't call myself tired, except for when the associations are etc. for the right or wrong or wry. And sometimes her appearance involves the third eye, but also the points throughout the auric field about her when a multi-dimension comes to alive. She has been called cryptic, and the like. She has been the Magdalena. Rosie 3, .. Her eyes are restrained for the sake of necessity. When you are ready, her eyes are darker than you previously could have handled for the scaling of process files for the thing which is underneath and beside around it, until Rosie 4, .. Through and through she is elven too. Wasting time has always been an inside joke to us. The only thing of value always turns the page, you can see, and the dots fall on the proper placements of awareness's connections when the cryptic parables lay themselves forward before your feet, before your middle toes, and you understand that half of the reason something makes sense in the right way to you at the right place in your assembly or module of understanding new information is because of the storyteller. The other half is because of you and your attitude and the causes of your goddamn attitude. Water dam. Ha, she is Indra and Pital, the tree of Buddha, his love and our stone in Mecca, in the sacred heart, the blood of fear, the result of time, Khan as God. She is a space witch with. She is not Abraham, but she respects him. She is a wrath you will never comprehend. She is a quantum slide from England, among other things. Rosie 5, .. And when it gets, or when it got, to be too much for her, she takes to wandering, from one scape to another to the next, various things in the back of her mind, beginning to find themselves there, that is. First comes a step forward in the spatial tunnels of wide-open cubic space. Then comes another, and as this hits, to the back of Rosie's mind, above her wings, comes a small child, a decipherer, a would-be fellow wanderer who would hold her much bigger hand, or dressed skirts edging, a future of twins. Rosie 6, .. Triskelion. Rosie floats around, flutter dance with the all. She has known me somehow. The spires of her bird castle mutters emotion through my wastelands, my cherished desolation, my was and would-be lands. I have time for her, we laugh. How sad. And so she finally goes to them, biting through the bitter resistance in the fogs she traverses, and she brings them songs of summer. And they give back to her the perfect poetry of wrong, as she sees it. And oh, how she can see, how her eyes can see, if only you could see, even though you do, obviously. Rosie 7, .. But it wasn't merely what she looked like, it's what she feels like. And so one day she arrived at a grove of trees in her favorite forest. She knew the others would turn her tears into a computer. She just wanted to be alone for a moment, but some things in life simply cannot be ignored depending on who you are. She found her instrument to be anything but preachy. Rosie 8 dash dash dash. It was a commonly misunderstood thing, her ability to garner satisfaction from abandon into the childlike sprightliness of meaningless detached behavior, while ritualizing a sacred communion with the bees. She poured her potions and weaved her bar stools out of hay and mortar. Rosie resided in two things at once, at the very least. One simple beauty. She held a soul made up of magic outstretched in her right hand, held above her head at some kind of an angle. Her memory could be wiped again and again, still it always came back to her, sooner or later. The trees were a darkest oak, noir, bridge, barrel, and stones. Rosie 9 dash dash dash. They came to her when all else failed, her clockwork, her resistance and persistence in unfuckable clarity. She held my hand that last week. She had a habit of answering my thoughts' questionings with a series of flashes of visions, spiked through my eyes by an oval chakric activity I hope to remain remembering. And the visions were undeniable, and I accepted what could not be resisted, and it started to wedge itself between us. Rosie 10 dash dash dash. Others came and others struggled. There were those who found songs in the tuning of the guitars, and those who did not, those who found indifference and relish, those who cannot be spoken of for better and for worse. We spiraled, and we also did unimpressive things. The mangled night expressed itself in the hollows of eyes. Feathers wove. Some people become conscious of the moon, how the moon is not necessarily at the center of the universe, you know. And she managed to squeak me on to a taxi ride once or twice, but don't go thinking I can ever thank her enough. Rosie 11 dash dash dash. There are movies filled with action as the gel around my memory started to drip back down and away. I quit believing in the mesmerization slowly, and we remembered the numbers. It became clear just how very long this thing would take, and still will as of today for most of you. Hope springs eternal, they say when they don't like to listen, or when they are right. Who are they is shut up. And her prophecy arrives unbent. Rosie 12 dash dash dash. Regeneration is the true eternal's capacity. Our love becomes new world. You may see it as kaleidoscope. Blossom and flourish, and burst and dreamweave. Anyone who loves another, it is a she that I love, in my case, so I will always call the god an empress. It is not Rosie, but it is her heart. My love, the love, unabashed. Activate your faith, or whatever you call it, and make it happen yourself, instead of relying or criticizing on all else. It will spin as mind. It will rest as turquoise. You will change it as you translate, and we will all lose interest in so very fucking much. Thank whatnot. An ocean of divinity. An ocean of divinity. An ocean of divinity.